You want to get up to speed on complicated topics fast so you come to the right place. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Today we're doing a deep dive into methane emissions, a really important part of the climate puzzle. You see, methane is what they call a super pollutant, much stronger than carbon dioxide in the short term, like way stronger. It's actually about 80 times more potent. And here's the thing. It's responsible for something like a third of the global warming we've experienced since the pre-industrial era. So cutting methane emissions is like finding a shortcut to cool down global temperatures. It's the most effective thing we could do for fast climate action. And what's kind of crazy is almost half of the methane emission reductions in the oil and gas industry could be done pretty much for free without costing the operators anything, because fixing those leaks often pays for itself. It's still a no-brainer, right? But even with these simple solutions, you keep running into political roadblock. A good example of this is that methane fee that was a part of the Inflation Reduction Act back in 2022. This fee was meant to encourage big energy companies to cut back on their emissions by basically making them pay more if they went over certain limits. So it was going to start at $900 per ton and then gradually increase to $1,500 per ton by 2026. The EPA even estimated that this fee would help cut down methane emissions by something like 1.2 million tons over 10 years. That's like taking 8 million gas guzzlers off the road for a whole year. Pretty impressive, right? But here's where things get interesting. Congress decided to repeal this methane fee. Yeah, both the House and the Senate, they voted to get rid of that EPA rule. And it's looking like the president is going to sign off on it too. So why did they repeal it? Well, there were a few reasons floating around. Some people were worried about putting too much pressure on smaller companies, and then there were concerns that consumers would end up having to pay more for everything. And of course, people were worried about energy costs going through the roof. Now, even though this is a setback here in the US, the fight against methane emissions isn't over globally. The European Union is really stepping up their game with some pretty tough emission standards. And this could actually force US companies to comply if they want to keep exporting natural gas to Europe. It just goes to show you that even though we have these political back and forths here in the US, international regulations can still play a big role in pushing for change globally. Another interesting thing happening is the rise of independent satellite operators. They're like methane detectives. They're using their technology to find and publicize methane leaks, which puts pressure on those companies to clean up their act. And some organizations are taking it even further by combining emissions data with health information, which empowers communities to hold those polluters accountable. We even have incredible technological advancements like Methane. This thing is literally orbiting the Earth every 96 minutes, keeping an eye on over 80% of the global oil and gas production. It's like having a watchdog in space, constantly sniffing out those methane leaks. We're even seeing real progress being made here on the ground. Look at the Permian Basin, for example. It's a huge center for oil and gas production. And in 2023, methane emissions from active wells there went down by a significant 26%. And what's even more encouraging is that the emissions intensity, which basically measures emissions per unit of output, that went down by about a third. And this is all while natural gas production was actually going up. So it's kind of a mixed bag, right? There's progress being made, but there are also these setbacks. It's definitely a complex situation. This progress, though, it's happening in this kind of complicated world where you've got different people with different interests in the industry. Like you've got these big oil companies that are actually okay with having some regulations, but then you have a lot of the smaller firms pushing back really hard against it. They're worried about how much it's going to cost and all the hassle of having to follow all these new rules. It really makes you think about how we can find that balance between protecting the environment, which is obviously really important, and the economic realities that these different companies have to deal with, right? So getting rid of that methane fee has some pretty big consequences for both the planet and, for our own wallets. Because when methane leaks out, it's basically wasted natural gas, right? And that means lost profits for those companies and more damage to the environment. Some people argue that instead of trying to get rid of the fee, these companies should be focusing on actually plugging those leaks. It seems like it would be a win-win, right? It's good for their business and it's good for the planet. This whole thing with the methane fee, it's actually part of a bigger trend of deregulation in the energy sector. For example, the Senate is getting ready to vote on getting rid of energy efficiency standards for tankless gas water heaters. It kind of makes you wonder what this whole shift in how we're regulating things means for the future of environmental policies, especially those aimed at tackling those harmful greenhouse gas emissions. This whole situation with methane emissions, it's a complicated one. We actually have the technology to find and fix those leaks, and we've even seen proof that reducing these emissions can actually be good for business. And of course, we all know how crucial it is to fight climate change, but political stuff and economic factors, they often get in the way of making any real progress. So the big question is, what can we actually do about it? In the face of all these setbacks, what strategies are actually going to work to reduce those methane emissions and get us moving in the right direction towards our climate goals? So this deep dive into methane emissions has really shown us how complex this all is. You got this amazing new technology, and then there are all these economic incentives, and they're all kind of bumping up against political realities and the way different industries work. It seems like to move forward, we really need to take a multi-pronged approach, something that embraces new innovations and encourages people to work together and prioritizes long-term sustainability instead of just these quick fixes that don't really solve anything. As we try to figure out how to deal with climate change, it's so important to remember that the choices we make today, they're going to have huge consequences for generations to come.